After an exciting divisional round in the NFL playoffs, the Seahawks are going to continue their search this week for a new offensive coordinator. Where do things stand, and do the results from this weekend potentially help them chase down a coveted candidate? We're going to be breaking it all down here on our MLK edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, the host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined here on MLK Day by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, and a special thanks to all the 12s who are tuning in. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. Whether you're listening in from Snohomish, Washington, or down in Tucson, Arizona, we appreciate each and every one of you. We are drawing closer to the start of free agency. We're getting closer to the NFL draft. I know that might seem a long way away, but we're going to be taking a look at some draft prospects for tonight's college football playoff championship game, the Ohio State Buckeyes and the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. We got some really fun prospects we are going to be diving into, along with the latest on the offensive coordinator chase for the Seahawks. This Monday episode brought your way by Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedInNFL and use the code all lowercase LockedInNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Now for your lead story here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. It was an exciting weekend in the NFL, much closer, more exciting games in the divisional round than we saw in the wild card round. And certainly there were a few upsets thrown in there as well. The biggest one being Dan Quinn, former Seahawks defensive coordinator, Bobby Wagner, the longtime star linebacker for the Seahawks. Those two helping lead the Commanders past the Lions at Ford Field, the 6th seed advancing to the NFC Championship game to play Saquon Barkley and the Eagles for a grudge match, round 3 between the NFC East rivals. And I think that's the game that we are probably going to be discussing the most in this segment, because the Seahawks still do not have a new offensive coordinator. They've not made a hire there. We do know, Rob, that Clint Kubiak as well as Grantudinsky both had a second interview being in person with the Seahawks on Friday, but there still has not been a hiring. And at least based on the discussions that I've had with multiple sources, the big reason I think that this has not been decided yet is there's a certain candidate by the name of Hank Fraley, the offensive line coach for the Lions. They were hoping to speak with a second time. We'll see if that ends up happening. There's a lot of dominoes that have already fallen today that may impact whether or not the Seahawks even get a chance to interview Fraley a second time. But that is really where this race sits right now as they try to find the replacement for Ryan Grubb. And the Lions losing when they did at least opened the door earlier for them to get that second interview if Fraley is able to do so or is interested in doing so.
Yeah, and that's one of the big questions here is, of course, Ben Johnson now, as you mentioned, has been, at least reportedly hired by the Chicago Bears to be their next head coach. And so there's a possibility that Hank Fraley might join him in Chicago. Heck, he might stay in Detroit and work with Dan Campbell and try to get the Lions, a little bit further along in the postseason, perhaps be able to win a Super Bowl. It also creates that opportunity now that the Seahawks can, according to NFL rules, actually be able to interview Hank Fraley and proceed a little bit further down that path. Now, again, just to kind of refresh for those of you who have been kind of enjoying the 3-day weekend, and as Corbin often says, thank you so very much for joining us at this point. But there are 5 finalists, as it appears at this point, at least 5 people that the Seahawks have interviewed for the offensive coordinator position. Clint Kubiak still remains, I think, probably the leader in the clubhouse at this point. But again, the aforementioned Hank Fraley of the Detroit Lions, the offensive line coach that we think would bring a little bit of that physical presence that the Seahawks have been lacking. He now is much more available because the Lions, of course, were unceremoniously as the number 1 seed booted out of the playoffs by Dan Quinn and the Washington Commanders. Thomas Brown, the former head coach, former offensive coordinator of the Chicago Bears. Grantudinsky, of course, of the Minnesota Vikings as well. And then another candidate that I am eager to talk about, Corbin, and that being Byron Leftwich. Now, he was the offensive coordinator of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for 4 years. Of those 4 years, twice the Buccaneers were second in passing. Twice they were first. Byron Leftwich is an unbelievable coach. He was a very good football player himself as a quarterback. And so he is somebody that I think that Seahawks fans and the Seahawks, decision makers are wise to be paying attention to at this point. In my 25 plus years now of evaluating players as far as who I think can be good football players, but also who could be good coaches, Byron Leftwich would be among the highest ranked players I've ever seen in that regard. I really do think that he has the mentality that to really be successful as a coach. So again, he is somebody that I think that the Seahawks fans should be paying attention to. The head coach in which he worked under, Bruce Arians, is still among the best offensive minds I've ever known. Jason Licht, the general manager of Tampa Bay Buccaneers, he and John Schneider go way, way, way back. So again, I think that Byron Leftwich is somebody that I recognize at this point. It seems like all he has done is a quote unquote virtual interview, but I do believe that Byron Leftwich is a future NFL head coach, that he has that type of ability. And I really love the possibility of Byron Leftwich and Geno Smith, or perhaps a young quarterback. I really think that could be an interesting combination for the Seahawks here, specifically because of who they already have at the quarterback position with Geno Smith and his ability to play a very similar type of a game as Byron Leftwich. I would like to see Geno Smith use his mobility. That was one of the things that Byron Leftwich struggled with a little bit. And I think that, again, Geno Smith is a significant upgrade than what Byron Leftwich is. But at the same time, I also think that they are going to have a very similar mentality. And so I do think that this would be an interesting fit should the Seahawks decide to go in that direction.
Yeah, it's interesting, Rob. I wrote an article about this yesterday, calling Byron Leftwich the dark horse for this coaching job. And look, we read the comments and we try to respond to as many of our listeners as we can. And I will admit, I thought that the Rooney rule for offensive coordinators, you only had to interview one. And that rule changed in 2021. The NFL communication site still said one. So that's why I thought it was only one. But you had to interview two. So we've had a lot of our listeners saying, well, Thomas Brown, Byron Leftwich, they're just interviewing him to check off those boxes. Not so fast. I think Byron Leftwich is a coach I would not be shocked at all if he gets a second interview. He has not had a job for 2 years. That's the one thing that's perplexing to me. He has not had a second job since the success that he had at Tampa Bay. I do wonder about the fit with Mike Macdonald, with what Mike Macdonald's looking for. When you consider the Buccaneers never finished better than 24th in rushing yards the entire time that he was there. Now, their passing game was just so darn good that it didn't matter until his last season when Tom Brady finally hit the wall with Father Time. They fell to 25th that year in offense because they couldn't run the ball, and the passing game was not – I mean, they still put up good numbers, but it was not as potent as it was in the previous seasons. That is something to keep an eye on, but – Byron Leftwich has done great work with veteran quarterbacks. Jameis Winston was in his 5th or 6th year, the 1 year they worked together. And yes, he threw a ton of interceptions, but the Buccaneers still had a top 3 scoring offense with that unit. And then Tom Brady links up with him. We saw what happened. They win the Super Bowl the first year. They win 13 games the second season. Tom Brady has lauded this guy's football intelligence, and they loved working together in Tampa Bay. So Geno Smith is a veteran QB. I'd be much more comfortable with Byron Leftwich in that case. He's only had one chance to really work with a young quarterback, and we saw that didn't work out with Josh Rosen. And that doesn't mean that falls on him. Josh Rosen didn't work out anywhere he went. But that is still – there's some caveats here I think that you have to consider. None of these guys are without any warts. Otherwise, they'd be a head coach right now in the NFL, or they wouldn't be seeking an offensive coordinator job. But it does feel right now like – Kubiak and probably Fraley. And look, we got to stop discounting Udinsky at this point. I mean, he's had 2 interviews, a guy that has just climbed the ladder so fast in Minnesota. Those kind of guys, there's a lot of risk because you're wondering, are we moving him too fast? At the same time, everything this guy has done, he has excelled at. And he's kind of got that football nerd mentality. And we know Mike Macdonald loves that. So he might be another coach here that we are not giving enough credence here in this race to replace Ryan Grubb.
Yeah, I'm happy that you mentioned Udinsky. I mean, I think that, again, the one of the things that is scary to me is just his age, 28 years old. My goodness. That is always going to be at least a little bit concerning. I do think that it's unlikely that Seattle would go in that route, just considering the fact that they, of course, made the gamble that was Ryan Grubb, considering the fact that he had never called plays in the NFL. You're going to be doing the exact same thing here with Dinsky. But my goodness, if you just meet somebody who is the most dynamic person in the room, and that is by all accounts exactly what Dinsky is, that he is kind of the Renaissance man. And I think that sometimes just dynamic leaders, trendsetters can just kind of, move the rotation of the sun in a way. And so I think that Mike McDonald might see some of those unique leadership and, just worldliness characteristics that have made other coaches be very successful. He might see that in Dinsky. So again, we've talked about this before, Corbin. I think that the fact that the Minnesota Vikings have some very interesting free agents along the offensive line, a pass catcher, and certainly at quarterback, that I do think that there is a reason why the Seahawks are very much paying attention to Grantudinsky. I do think at this point, the most likely scenario is the Seattle is going to be reaching out again to Clint Kubiak and Hank Fraley. And then again, to me, Byron Leftwich is the, as you said, the dark horse. And I think a very strong dark horse, one worth possibly betting on, just because, again, for the same leadership factors that I mentioned before with Grantudinsky, the fact that Byron Leftwich is a former quarterback himself, I think that just gives him an ability to read defenses and make adjustments with his quarterbacks. It's that ability to synchronize with the quarterbacks, I think, is, kind of puts Byron Leftwich in a little bit of a different situation here. Kubiak as well. Again, I just think that they not only have the experience, but also have the perspective that I think is going to be critical to the Seahawks in this search for their offensive coordinator.
We've got the college football playoff championship game coming tonight. What does that mean here on Locked On Seahawks? Well, we're going to take a deep dive into several NFL draft prospects for both the Buckeyes and the Fighting Irish. We'll get to our first round prospects coming up next here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. When you're tasked with hiring for your small business, you want to have as many top-tier candidates as possible to interview. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. As a site manager for Seahawks on SI, LinkedIn Jobs has been my go-to to post writing positions to land top candidates, and they made the process easy and seamless. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or the resources to hire. And that's why LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedInNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedInNFL to post your job free. Terms and conditions apply. It's playoff time, and if you're like me, you want to make the most of these final weeks of football action, and that's where Prize Picks comes in. If you love football and want a chance to win real money while watching the games, Prize Picks is the place for you. It's the best way to turn your sports opinions into cash with daily fantasy player projections. With Prize Picks, you simply pick more or less on player stats like total passing yards or rushing touchdowns for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your money. You can make your picks in less than 60 seconds, whether you're looking for a flex play to boost your payout or want to cash out quickly. Prize Picks has got you covered, and with over 10 million members and billions in winnings, it's clear that people are loving the platform. This week, I'm going to be looking at Saquon Barkley to have more than 2 rushing touchdowns for the Philadelphia Eagles against the Washington Commanders. It's quick, simple, and so much fun to challenge myself and my friends. Here's a special offer for Locked On NFL listeners. Download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 instantly when you play $5. Prize Picks, run your game. Welcome back to the Locked On Seahawks podcast, Monday edition. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be teaming up, as always, with my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s here on MLK Day. Thank you, as always, for listening and making the Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. The college football season is going to come to an end tonight. We've got a thrilling matchup on tap. The Ohio State Buckeyes, the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, 2 of the true blue bloods in college football, battling for supremacy to get that college football championship title. Rob, when we look at this matchup, obviously running an NFL show, we are going to look at it from an NFL draft lens. There's no question about it. And it's really interesting. I don't want to say that Notre Dame is an underdog going into this game because Notre Dame is a very good football team. But at least in terms of NFL talent, all you have to look is at the first round prospects to understand that there's one team in this matchup that has a lot more players that are going to be ready to come into the league and take the league by storm. There's a lot more blue chip prospects on one roster than the other.
Oh, no question about it. That's the Ohio State Buckeyes. I mean, my goodness. Notre Dame is a terrific football team. Marcus Freeman is the head coach. I think has done as good of a job as anybody in all of America in terms of where he has put his team in position. I think that there are a number of future first or second round picks on Notre Dame's team. I just think that most of them are freshmen and sophomores. Corbin, there is literally a six-pack of 2025 first-round selections on these two rosters. 5 of them, in my opinion, are on the Ohio State roster. 1 of them is with Notre Dame as far as guys for 2025. However, 1 for Ohio State and 1 for Notre Dame are both sidelined due to injury. Josh Simmons, the left tackle, who is a dancing bear, 6'5", 315 pounds. Corbin, to me, he would be a perfect player for the Seahawks. In fact, I actually have him projected to Seattle, number 18 overall in the last mock draft I have at foxsports.com. His ability to play the left and right tackle positions, I think, would give the Seahawks an awful lot of flexibility with Charles Cross, a couple of years away from his free agent year, but still, is he playing with the physicality that Mike McDonald prefers at that spot? Obviously, Abraham Lucas, Mike Jarrell, Stone Forsythe, the revolving door at the right tackle position, that is something to be concerned about. Again, Josh Simmons, to me, the fact that he went down with a knee injury early in the year, I think is one of the reasons why a guy who might be the most talented offensive lineman in the 2025 draft class, why he might be available to Seattle at number 18 overall. On the similar side, Benjamin Morrison, the cornerback for Notre Dame, he went down with a hip injury. When he is healthy, to me, Corbin, he is one of the better players in this draft class, and I think a slam dunk first round pick. Obviously, cornerback is not a huge area of concern for the Seahawks, but still, he is a legitimate first round player, at least in my opinion, in a draft class that I don't think has a lot of legitimate first-round players. The other 4 players, as I mentioned before, that I think all on the Ohio State sideline are basically 3 defensive linemen and then a dynamic wide receiver that a lot of Pacific Northwest fans are going to be familiar with. Emeka Egbuka, who played his prep ball at Steilacoom High School, just about 40 minutes south of Seattle itself. Terrific wide receiver, very similar in some ways to Jackson Smith and Jigba. We thought that Seattle has struggled with the wide receiver position. We know that is an area of concern for them, considering the bloated contracts moving forward. But really, to me, it's a defensive lineman, JT Tuimoloau, who came from Eastside Catholic in Seattle prior to signing with Ohio State. Jack Sawyer, the pass rushing defensive end, who just seems like he makes every big play whenever the Buckeyes actually need it. And then the big defensive tackle, Tyleik Williams, 6'3", 325 pounds. Oh my goodness. Matching him up with Byron Murphy II in the inside. Corbin, there are so many legitimate Seahawks kind of prospects in this national championship game, at least on the rosters, maybe not always on the field, that I think from a Seahawks perspective, you've got to be tuning in this year to the championship.
When I look at this crop of players, and I added Xavier Watts, the safety for Notre Dame, because I do think there's a good chance that he goes in the first round. I have him as 42 on my list right now, which would be a second rounder, but there's not a lot of safety talent in this draft class. And so I could see him being somebody that's got some ball skills, has enough size to play both safety spots that could sneak his way into the first round. But again, Ohio State has a huge talent advantage here when you're looking at first rounders. Jack Sawyer, some fans in the Pacific Northwest may watch the games and say, God, that guy runs his mouth. So does Jared Verse in LA. Look what he did in his rookie season. And the Seahawks could potentially move on from either Uchenna Nwosu or Draymond Jones this offseason.
Or both.
Boy Mafe is going in the final year of his rookie contract. I don't think edge would be a position that would be out of question that the Seahawks could pick early, because that might be one of the deeper position groups in this draft. And you got 2 really good players there for Ohio State that would make sense. But I'm going to make an argument of all these first rounders. You mentioned, I don't think receiver is necessarily a weakness for the Seattle Seahawks, but there is a very good chance Tyler Lockett is not back next season. And there is an outside chance that the team could move DK Metcalf if they can't agree to an extension. I don't know that they want to go into this next year with the cap hit that he's got right now for 2025. I think that they ideally would have him and JSN together for another couple seasons minimum, but why not team Egbuka back up with Jackson Smith and Jigba? Because I think they are similar players, but Egbuka, I think, has more upside as a boundary receiver, and I think he can do more of the damage downfield necessarily than what JSN is going to do. And Ohio State just, you want to talk about a school that just kicks out stud receiver after stud receiver. And we know that Smith is coming in a couple years. Geno Smith's cousin. He's going to maybe be the number one pick in the draft in a couple years. Extremely talented player. They're going to get to see tonight. Not eligible for the draft yet, but I think Egbuka and Smith and Jigba back together. If the Seahawks picked him at number 18, I would not bat an eye at all, because that would give them another receiver that's going to have at least the next 4 years on a rookie contract. It cuts down the amount of investment you have in that position. And you can make an argument talent-wise with where Tyler Lockett's at now, that you now have a much more talented receiver group with more upside moving forward, assuming you have Metcalf and JSN there as well. I would not bat an eye if they took a receiver at pick number 18. If Egbuka is still there, I don't know if he would even be there at 18, because this kid is an extremely talented player.
He's talented. He's pro ready. He's played an awful lot of football on the inside as well as the outside. He runs crisp routes, catches the ball with his hands. Corbin, this is not as good of a wide receiver class as we have seen in recent years. And so I do think there's a possibility Egbuka is going to wind up going in the first round. I think that he should. Again, to me, he is pro-ready, and I don't see a lot of pro-ready receivers in this class. I also, again, as you mentioned before, it should surprise no one if the Seahawks decide to go with another edge rusher. Draymond Jones and Boye Mafe being on the last year of his rookie deal, Draymond Jones being a salary cap casualty possibility. Uchenna Nwosu, I think, is a lesser possibility at that, but still is a candidate. Suddenly Seattle has some concerns at the edge rusher. I think if this is a 2025 draft class that is full of offensive and defensive linemen, and if you ask me where the Seahawks need to improve, it is, again, along the line of scrimmage. And so I think that JT Tuimoloau as well as Jack Sawyer, to me, are very much players that would fit the bill of what Seattle's looking for. They are powerful at the point of attack. They are instinctive football players. They get their hands up into the passing lanes. They tip passes. They force fumbles. They create sacks. They play their best football in the biggest moments. And so, again, that is exactly what Mike McDonald was looking for. So if either of them happen to be available at number 18 overall, I know that there are a lot of people out there who don't like either one of these players. You look at some of the other draft nicks out there, or draft prognosticators out there, they are not as high as you and I appear to be on JT and Jack Sawyer. Frankly, I think that's a mistake on their part. Don't worry. You're going to see both those two players, JT and Jack Sawyer, are both going to wind up being long-time NFL contributors, and that's exactly what John Schneider, Mike McDonald are looking to bring to the Seahawks. So this is a draft class and a national championship game that really sets up beautifully for what the Seahawks are looking to get bigger, more physical, more nastier along the line of scrimmage.
And there's also some potential quarterbacks and stuff that we're going to be looking at coming up next, because both these teams have an abundance of talent that's going to go on day 2 and day 3 in the 2025 NFL draft that will be on display tonight as they battle for a national championship. We'll get to that up next here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets. If you win your first bet, that's $300 to keep the action going. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets in the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, check out live play-by-play, and much more on the same page where you place your bets. You can bet on everything from Josh Allen throwing for at least 250 yards against the Chiefs in the NFC Championship or AFC Championship game. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Welcome back to the Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. He is Rob Rang. A special thanks to all the 12s who are tuning in, and thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. For your second listen, make sure to tune in to the Locked On NFL podcast now twice a day. Tyler Rowland of Locked On Titans giving you a morning of Cup NFL Espresso, and then in the afternoon, from Locked On Jaguars, our good friend Tony Wiggins bringing the humor and the insight you're not going to find anywhere else. That's Locked On NFL twice a day on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast. Make sure you don't miss a single episode. Make Locked On Seahawks or Locked On NFL your second listen. Locked On Seahawks your first listen. Okay, Rob, let's get to the national championship game. Day 2 and day 3 prospects, because this is really where Super Bowl teams are built. It's the ability to find talent in the later rounds, and there's going to be a lot of Ohio State and Notre Dame players that are going to be coming off the board in those final 6 rounds. When you look at the second and third round, I know that our listeners are going to think this is crazy that these two teams are playing the national title with this kind of a discrepancy, but as you mentioned, a lot of it has to do with Notre Dame's really great players are freshmen and sophomores. They are not eligible to be in the draft. Ohio State's got a lot of veteran players on their team that have been with the program or transferred to Ohio State after playing a number of years with another program. Those players are all eligible. So Ohio State's just got a lot more NFL draft ready and eligible players on their roster, and that continues on day 2. And for me, I'm excited to talk about this because we've got not one, but 2 running backs from Ohio State that could go as early as the early second round.
Yeah, no question about it. I mean, Quinshon Judkins, the transfer from Ole Miss, and Lane Kiffin, who was absolutely unbelievable in the SEC. He transfers to Ohio State, and he and Travion Henderson, the incumbent starter for the Ohio State Buckeyes, who actually plays a little bit more of a Zach Charbonnet game. He's a little bit shorter, a little bit squatter, he's more powerful. Quinshon Judkins is the one that reminds me a little bit of Joe Mixon, who, of course, has been a dynamic player since he also ran kind of second string a lot of the time in his collegiate level at the at Oklahoma. And I think that Quinshon Judkins is actually going to wind up being the first drafted of these 2 backs. He's a little bit more of a slasher. He's 6'1", 215 pounds. He's got size, he's got speed, he's got dynamic hands out of the backfield. Corbin, I know there's a lot of Seahawk fans out there who have no interest in investing a draft pick and another running back, but we know that this is the Seahawks and they will invest draft picks into running backs. We also, as you mentioned, know that Notre Dame is uniquely gifted when it comes to underclassmen. So if you're just watching this from a national championship perspective, the most talented back on the field may very well be the true sophomore Jeremiah Love for Notre Dame, who, of course, is not eligible for the 2025 draft class. So between Jeremiah Love for Notre Dame, Quinshon Judkins, as well as Travion Henderson from Ohio State, all 3 of these running backs are all legitimate NFL caliber starting players. So again, very exciting class, a very exciting game from just an NFL draft evaluation. I think there's a lot of Seahawks fans out there, Corbin, who are going to be looking towards these quarterbacks. And Riley Leonard from Notre Dame, Will Howard for Ohio State, both are 6'4", both are 215 pounds plus, both have the mobility that Geno Smith only occasionally is willing to show, and also have at least decent accuracy, have shown the ability to thread the needle on a variety of different passes. Now, I don't think that either one of them are nearly as accurate as a Geno Smith, but still, when you're talking about day 3 sections, 4th, 5th round, I think that both of them might be worth a little bit of a gamble, a little bit of a developmental strategy on these quarterbacks. And again, if Geno Smith is indeed going to be the starter in 2025 for the Seahawks, John Schneider knows that, Mike McDonald knows that, then I do think these are quarterback candidates that the Seahawks should be considering, rather than investing that 1st or 2nd round selection on a quarterback who maybe has higher upside, but also is a lot further along, whether they might be able to get onto the field for the Seahawks.
Yeah, the quarterback discussion going into this game is going to be interesting because I don't think either one of these players is going to go earlier than maybe the 3rd round. We might see one of them sneak into the 3rd round, especially if Will Howard or Riley Leonard, if one of them has a monster championship game and then does well in the pre-draft testing process. Good meetings, whatever. you could easily see one of these QBs, if not both, sneak up there. I just would be really surprised if they go in the first 2 rounds. It's not a great quarterback class. And I think both these players, while they've been good enough to lead talented football teams to the national championship game, I also think both of these guys have clear and obvious weaknesses when you watch their game. Now, Will Howard, Ohio State, he's been playing lights out in this tournament. He has been fantastic for the Buckeyes. When you go back and you watch the regular season games, though, the Michigan loss, which is still one of the most baffling losses from this entire season in college football, but there were just too many games where, for being somebody that started 3 years at Kansas State before he came to Ohio State, there's just too many times where the decision-making is questionable for Will Howard, and he tries to do too much with, to me, what is an above average but not great arm. He does not have the howitzer that somebody like Geno Smith has. And Riley Leonard, I think, has a weaker arm than what Will Howard does. He is an incredible runner. Both these guys, you can run designed run plays with. You can do read option. They can create on scrambles and do a lot of damage. So if you're looking for a mobile dual threat quarterback to develop, both these guys could be candidates, but they also played a lot of college football, and they haven't necessarily taken that step towards where they can be viewed as a legitimate prospect for a starting quarterback position, at least early when they come into the NFL. So I think these guys are clearly day 3 flyer prospects for any team that's interested in them.
And I 100% agree with you. I do think that Riley Leonard's touch and ability to throw the ball off of play action makes him that much more intriguing from a Seahawks perspective. That said, to kind of go back to our initial conversation, Corbin, just the talent disparity in this national championship game, to me, greatly favors Ohio State. I think that Will Howard is going to be in a better position to boost his draft stock, so to speak. I'm not a big believer that one game, even one as celebrated as national championship game, is very likely to move the needle when you're talking about a 4-year starter like Riley Leonard or Will Howard. But at the same time, I do think that if Will Howard or Riley Leonard, for that matter, if either one of them play just a pristine football game where they don't give up the ball in terms of turnovers, they make good decisions when they have a little bit of pressure on their face. I think Ohio State again can get more pressure on Riley Leonard. So I do think that this is a game where you can boost your stock at least a little bit. And I do think that Riley Leonard's game actually fits in better with what I believe Mike McDonald is looking to do in terms of running the ball, having a quarterback that might be able to present a little bit more of a threat to the defense with his own legs. And then again, the touch, the anticipation, throw over the top. To me, that is where the Seahawks were at their best in 2024, and fascinating to see what kind of adjustments they're going to be making for 2025.
As far as Seahawks prospects that fit needs, I think if you're looking on day 2, second round, guard Donovan Jackson is definitely somebody that I would bookmark because he brings physicality. He is a above average athlete for the position. He might actually sneak into the end of the first round if he has a good pre-draft process, because this is not, as you said, it's a good offensive line class, but there's a drop-off after the first couple guards. I could see him being in that mix, though. He's that kind of a player that still has untapped upside, which can lead to higher picks. But I think Donovan Jackson is somebody that very much should be on the Seahawks radar in the second round range. And then I think when you look at day 3, I think tight end is a position that could have some significant changes for the Seahawks, including Noah Fant getting let go because of his cap hit and how much money he's getting paid. And in that case, you're going to need to retool that room. You've got A.J. Barner, who looks like he's going to be a good one. But I think Mitchell Evans on day 3, Notre Dame's tight end. I mean, you can't go wrong with Notre Dame tight ends. Like, they just kick them out every year. Mitchell Evans is a guy that's kind of hovering under the radar. But if you've watched Notre Dame games, you know who this kid is. I believe he had 4 touchdown catches this year for the Fighting Irish. You put him in this offense, he's 6'4", 255. He's got blocking ability. He can catch. You put him with A.J. Barner, you've suddenly got a much more exciting tight end group that is a lot cheaper, too, for the Seahawks moving forward.
Well, and we're going to be on the conversation of players who might be cheaper. Of course, the Seahawks are going to have some massive decisions in the secondary. We mentioned before Xavier Watts. I mean, he had 7 interceptions for Notre Dame this past season. He is their superstar in the secondary at this point. But I think sometimes that another player I'm very high on from that Notre Dame secondary, Jordan Clark, a nickel corner. He's 5'10", he's 180 pounds, Corbin. He doesn't have the size that Mike McDonald has traditionally preferred, but he's a scrappy scrappy nickel corner. Where's number 0? He is somebody I think to kind of keep an eye on in this game. And then for Ohio State, Denzel Burke, a much taller, more physical, much taller corner. He's not necessarily more physical, but still 6'1", 200 pounds. He has that prototypical size that on day 2, perhaps even day 3, if either one of those two corners are available, to me, I think that I see guys who are going to be able to come into the NFL and be productive. And considering the fact that Rick Woolen has been up and down, obviously Devin Witherspoon's a stud. Josh Jobe was a huge success this season, but still, it's not something I think that the Seahawks are going to want to gamble. That Josh Jobe and Rick Woolen are going to be able to kind of keep ascending. I think the expectations Devin Witherspoon will, but still, wouldn't be surprised at all. Knowing that Trey Brown is likely elsewhere, knowing that Artie Burns is likely playing elsewhere, et cetera, I do think that the Seahawks are going to be looking at the cornerback talent in this game as well.
As always, you can follow me on X and Blue Sky at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts to make sure you don't miss a single episode. When we come back tomorrow, we're going to start taking a little bit deeper dive into free agency. Rob and I are going to be dishing out our rankings for Seattle's 10 unrestricted free agents in terms of who should be prioritized to re-sign for 2025 and beyond. Make sure that you're watching and enjoy the rest of your MLK Day and the championship game tonight. Go Hawks.